Next up, we have James with back-to-front component development and deployment. Take it away, James.
Thanks, Hannah. I hope everyone can hear me. Bit of an introduction. My name is James Zhou. I'm the Senior AEM Solution Consultant from Adobe. I have been using AEM for almost 10 years now, and I've led many small, large projects in Australia. So today, I would like to share a topic regarding the AEM development. I call it back-to-front component development and the deployment. And obviously, the back-to-front here means the back end to the front end. All right, so in the next 30 minutes, you're going to see three things. First one is a new way of developing AEM components. And then you're going to see how I'm going to debug my AEM projects in a different way. And lastly, you will find out this is probably a new way for you to launch AEM sites. And you might notice that I double quote new because when I talk this to our customers, I feel like they kind of like already start using some of the approach I'm going to show, I'm going to demo. Some of them maybe heard of it before, but I haven't got a chance to try it. Or some of them maybe are just like, oh, this is a good way. So I kind of like saying, you may have the similar feeling. So if you have the questions, feel free to drop into the chat. I think at the end, I've got some time to cover the QA session. All right, so you've probably seen this slide from Cedric's session before. This is 2023. So although we're talking about content management systems, but we're still leveraging a lot of technologies. And a lot of technologies, they actually changed a lot since the last time we have checked. So HTTP2, the protocol being invented about 10 years ago, now becomes standard. And comparing with HTTP1, it's faster, it's smart, which means now, if you talk to the page, we used to say it's a server-side rendering, it's a client-side rendering, or it's a mix of the rendering. They're all fine now. Then there's no significant difference in terms of responding when you're using the three types of the rendering method. Next thing, the biggest API we're using is called a web platform. So actually, it's the browser here. So can I ask, do you remember the version of the browser that you're using? Right? Like for me, if you ask me Firefox, I'd probably say maybe last time I checked is 10 or 20 or something. Chrome will be larger than that, 70 or something. So actually, the fact is, in October, the stable version of these browsers, Firefox is 119, Chrome is 118, and Safari is 17.1. So there's lots of improvements and enhancements that this company has built within your browser now. That means when you consider doing something, usually you leverage some framework because you know that the browser cannot provide that functions, and then you use this framework. But now, maybe the browser has already provided that capability. So it's time to consider when you want to use a new framework, or time to consider some frameworks that have been using for many years. What is the impact when you're using a framework? Does that impact my page performance? Does that impact my Google Lighthouse score, etc.? And the last thing, in 2023, we're not just building the web pages. We're building the experience with the high performance and high impact. And we want to achieve 100 as our Lighthouse score. So actually, the AEM Edge Delivery Services has already helped 100 plus customers to move from like a score lower to like 20 or 30 to 100. So I look at how the AEM Edge Delivery Service works, and I got a lot of inspirations from them, which made me to create this topic, back to front-end component development. All right, so in the last 10 years, I talked to a lot of dev teams. I usually ask them three questions. How long do you spend to deliver AEM projects? How long do you spend to launch a site? Is it months, weeks, or days? And the second question is how quickly you can deploy your AEM changes to production. Need like a 2 sprint, 1 sprint, a couple of days? Can you do that in the business hours, or do you need some content freeze, etc.? And the last thing I usually ask them is how many components or templates you're going to create it for a website in AEM. Is that like less than 20, or the 50, or more than 100? So here is the flow after my observations or what my personal experience is a typical way of launching their websites in AEM. So you're going to start with the product managers creating some like wireframe design, and then moving to give it to the UX designer, applying some branding guide over there, and give it to the front-end developer to cut off to the HTML, and give this HTML to the back-end developers, and they're going to split it into the component. And some smart guy will convert this HTML into a component with authoring dialog. And another guy will merge them together, maybe make a big deployment. And at the end, we're going to tell the content team that, hey, template is ready, component is ready, please start creating your content. It works, right? But it's not that perfect, right? Because if you look at the time it's spent, of course, this is the time can vary based on your team size or skill set. But it's actually take a lot of steps in order to finally get a piece of the content or the piece of the blank page your content team can start authoring then. And also, if you look at this approach in a high level, this sounds like a waterfall approach. And everyone is kind of like depending on the previous steps work. For example, your backend developers, they can't do anything until they get HTML, right? The real HTML can match the design. And the poor guy, the site author, is they can't author any content. Even they can have the content on day one, ready on day one, but they can't do that because they don't know which component is going to be used. And the second thing is about the deployment, because at the end, you're going to merge everything together, and it's going to take too long. And sometimes it requires some content to freeze. I can't do that in the business hours if you want some like big dynamic transactional sites. And also, I always see a big component catalog. And I can see a lot of duplication of the component template that are being created for different user cases. Even they look the same. And then finally, if you look at the page performance, and you can see in this arrow, what has been passing by from block to block is actually the final HTML. That means the HTML has been tweaked by many people, which caused the consequence that no one will take the responsibility of that one. Because if you are the product owner, you say, hey, why my websites like Google Lighthouses was so low? And they'll say, oh, that maybe it's because front-end guy is using this library, or that's because the back-end guide hasn't created a good HTML markup for that. So that makes us to think, if there any new way to launch their websites, then with the help or with the innovations of the AEM cloud services, so we got the idea of the site template first, and also inspired by the Edge delivery services, we kind of proposing a new way you can launch your website. And you can see, so you're going to first define some templates. And of course, you're going to leverage all the out-of-box ones. You've got all the cool components that are ready to go. And we would like the content author to be able to create a content on day one when the content's ready. And also at the same time, we're going to let the front-end developer to focus on the presentation, the layout. And if they see anything needs to be tweaked, they will first using the web platform API, which will be the CSS or JavaScript to match the requirement. And if they can match the requirement, they should be able to deploy that straight away. And finally, if some functions need extending, we're going to look at the backend developers, our AEM developers. We're going to ask them to customize some components and then make it in as part of our repository and build and deploy it. So you may have heard this term today, we call no code, low code, full code. Then actually they are representing these three personas in this website launch. So for anything we think the non-technical people can do, so we should encourage them, go and initialize the new page without, don't worry about the presentation, put the content there, and then let your dev team worry about the presentation, worry about the integration. And on the second, on the middle, you'll see the front-end developers. Sometimes you will see people complain, oh, my front-end developers, they don't use AEM, or they know very limited about AEM. Can they do the development? So the answer is yes now, because the way I'm going to show you is how a pure front-end developer can contribute, can make changes in your AEM projects. And then lastly, I think everyone is familiar with that. That's the backend developers with all the activities. They can still fully extend it and create the site when necessary. All right, let me go through some demonstration. This is my AEM sandbox, and you can see I've got a site here. It's a coffee site. We call the Frescopa, and got the home page. It's got the right architecture, the structure of the site. And if I open the home page, you see the page looks like this. So it's got some banner, logo, menu. I've got some like tile, teaser, whatever you call that, etc. But if I want to ask you a question, so given everyone in the room is developers, I like talk to developers. How many components do you think you need to create to implement that site? I'll tell you my answer. And actually, this site has been built by Mark and our team. So we actually haven't created any new components for this website. So if I go over down, I want to add some new components. You can see everything, they are all coming from the core components. The only thing we made is we create a theme, and the theme can apply perfectly into this core components. Right? So maybe you will ask, how are you going to do that? Right? Because I can clearly see if I'm a front-end developer, I can see there must be two components over here because this is the banner and this is kind of like a tire. But if you are wearing the hat from the content authors team, they're going to give you a different answer because no matter these three variations in the look and feel it is, but for them, they're the same because I'm authoring the same content, an image, a button, some text, and then they're kind of like in the same pattern. So that creates us, I think, what should be the contract between your content team and your development team? Usually it's the HTML because finally it's the final output. But we kind of like switch this because we want the contract between your content team and your development team become the model of your content. So I show you the way how I do it. So if you're familiar with the AEM, you're familiar with the star system. So I've got the star system, which is ready, and I can easily change this. And I'm using the text to write and give me this variation, and I'm using the text button that give me this variation. So let's say tomorrow the content team said, "Hi, I would like to create a new variation. I don't like this consistent look the same. I want this part to be the top." So what they're gonna do is they're gonna go here, edit the template. So for people who know AEM, this is what we call the policy editor or template editor interface that allows to define the configuration of your components. So I'm going to find a teaser component, which I'm using. I'm going to come here and add a style. Here now, there's no implementation for that, but because I'm the content team, I know I'm going to call it text to top, and I'll give them a name. All right, it's ready to go. So if I save that, refresh the page, I should be able to leverage that style now. Although there's no impact, there's no implementation, but that's ready because that's all I want to do because I got the same content. I just need to change some variation of that. So if I go here and change to the text to top, and it just fall back to the default style, that's fine. So now I'm going to bring you the source code of this site. So the way I implement the theme that I mentioned that can match to our core component is like this. So if you are a front-end expert, you'll find out this is a pure front-end project. It's got the package JSON, with declaring some dependency, etc. If you look at the source codes, what I'm implementing here, they are all the component-based CSS and JavaScript. And then eventually they're going to all bundle together and then deploy and then refer back the sites. So remember, our task is to implement a new variation of this component. So I go to my teaser components, and you can see that for every variation, I'm using the CSS to control it. So now I'm going to have a new one called text at top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it. Actually, I copied from the bottom one because So the contract here is the style name, which I just the content team just put it, and he will let the front end team knows I'm going to use this one. And the next thing I'm going to do is to make it as part of my reference. So now my work is done. I would like to test it. So the new way of testing or debug this is from your local. And by the way, I haven't installed any AEM on my local because I'm a front-end developer. Can I debug this? Yes, you can. So I'm going to come here, or I restart it. So you can see that I'm using my npm command just to run a local web service. And this service is running on the 7002 port. And I forgot to mention one thing. I actually define a variable template here because that can allow me to proxy my local web server to a remote AEM instance. And that's why I don't need to install AEM. So the result is, so if I switch to my browser and I refresh this page, this is the localhost page. And this is the proxy content. So I'm going to do a rebuild of this and see how it look like. So let me just read it. And I want to make sure I've got all the content ready. So this is the one I'm using, and this is the one I changed it. Good. So let me come here and do a bit of like a refresh. There you go. It started working. Even I haven't deployed anything, I'm able to debug that now with no issues. So you may say, okay, yeah, that's a good, I can still use the component to do it. I can just using some authoring dialog, having something, and I just have the logic on my component. But the way we say this is new is this actually doesn't require any front backend, like AEM developers involvement, because the front-end team can do all it by itself. So if we extend this concept a little bit, so let's look at some of the other components what I'm using. So this one, you probably think this is going to be like a 3-tier component that I'm using, but actually it's not. It's a component, it's a content fragment list component. I just add a new variation using the JavaScript to do it. And similar for this one, you see this is maybe another one, but if I tell you, I'm actually using a content fragment to do it. And the reason why I'm using content fragment component, because it's all out of box. All I need to do is just create a content fragment, and I can get it. And then the front-end team can go and doing some banner style. Or if you want a bigger one, I actually have a bigger one. So again, all out-of-box components, but with a more involvement from your front-end team can make these things happen. And the benefits is, of course, it's fast. And if you go back here to look at what I've done for the content fragment component, it will be over here. So I got all the variations. I got its own namespace for the CSS. And you can see I can also using the web platform API, which is all the out-of-box JavaScript APIs, to do a bit of manipulation on the DOM. Right? Usually you're using some framework to do it, but it's all now possible by just using the web platform API. All right, the next thing I'm going to just do something different or complicated. So now imagine I'm the content team again. Let's just make it a little bit small. So because this is about the coffee shops, I would like to have interactive components with my customer. I call it a map. So apparently you can imagine implementing a map widget on that will require some work, right? But because I know I got the requirement for the map, and as the content, I know my front-end team is going to implement it. So all I need to do is probably just making a container over here, and I put the text over here said, I wish we could have a map here. And hold on, what is the contract between myself and the backend team? That will be the ID. So I'm using the ID. So if you've seen, so the contract begin translated to, if you've seen a location container being put on the page, please display a map over here. No problem. Front-end team say, I can do it. So let's go back to our source code. I'm going to show you how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to create a map component. And in this case, I'm going to have using some JavaScript logic to find out if there are any existence of this container. And because I know I've got something I can leverage, I can use in this Google Map React API. So now you can introduce a framework when needed, right? And you can just fully implement this using the React library. And the next thing you're going to do is just maybe include it in your JavaScript. So when you save that, you're going to trigger some local build. And if I switch back to my local browser, ideally, you will see there's a map component show up. You can drag and drop it. You can do some bit of search based on needed. It's a fully interactive. It's a complicated component, can still leverage in the framework to do it. But I only use it when I think this is needed. So back to what we just covered in this demonstration is like from the simple to the complicated components, there are ways that you can just use in the no code or the low code approach to implement it. And here now I haven't to do any creating any new component. But then the next question is, how can I get it deployed, right? Because I'm happy with my local. So I'm going back to my AEM screen over here. So for those of you who are familiar with AEM Cloud Services, you will see we have a new panel available for your sites. If you switch to the site over here, so that actually tells you what is the front-end theme this website is using. So their documents talk about how you can just configure your site using the theme. But I'll share the link later. So this is already someone I already created. But if I switch to a different site, I think that actually allows to download the theme. So when you download the theme, you will see the source code I just showed you on my Visual Code. So once you've done that, all you need to do is come to your Cloud Manager. And instead of creating a full stack pipeline, you're going to create a pipeline called a front-end pipeline. I'm going to tell you what it looks like. So similar with what you created for the normal deployment, the full stack deployment. All you need to specify here is what's your environment, what is your repository, and what's your branch. So that branch contains your theme code can now become a separate, independent release artifact and managed by this front-end pipeline. So if you run this pipeline, what will happen is it will combine all the source code from the JavaScript and the CSS and deploy it in the CDN. So in this case, your front-end theme are not being deployed into your AEM author or publisher. It's going to the CDN. And from the interface, what you can see here is this allows you to be able to find out what is the deployment activities of this theme. So like I've done this many times, you can see you can easily roll it back. And what can also allow you to do is you can have a multiple sites, they can have a multiple theme. You only have like bring the multi-tenant into the scenario. They can completely manage this separately. And you may ask how fast I can get this. So if I show you some activities I've done, and then normally, see, this is my full stack deployment. It takes like 20 or 30 minutes. But front-end deployment pipeline is much, much faster. 6 or 8 minutes. You get your change ready in production. So if I run my pipeline now, and after 6 minutes, I refresh this page, I should see the new variations been taken effect. The new map component has been also integrated. All right, so let's back to my slide. And I'm going to just to summarize what I've just showed you in terms of this new way of launching the component. So remember I said rendering is all fine now. So the way we pick now is kind of like a mixed approach. So when we implement that website, what happened is when you request a page, And what AEM returned to the browser is what we call a semantic HTML. And then this is actually inspired by the Edge Delivery Services. And you can see Edge Delivery Services leverage this approach to achieve 100 Google Lighthouse scores. And then after you've done that, you start to introduce using the CSS and JavaScript to changing the layout. So what's the benefit of doing that? So firstly, from the backend development perspective, I'm leveraging all the out-of-box core components. I've got good reusability because if I find out the data model, the content model didn't change, I don't bother creating new components. My component catalog will be very minimal. I've got minimal customization. I can focus on the integration part, right? Because apart from the component, we also spend some time to do a lot of integration. So I can free up my time and spend more time on the integration or the extension. But the benefit for the front-end dev is, firstly, I'm being able to proceed to the remote AEM to test my code. I can clearly easily check the performance of my code, my HTML I contributed. And also, if I'm going to do the change, I don't need to wait for like a big approval or something. I can easily use in this front-end pipeline to do this. And no doubt to mention, because on day one, the content team starts to contribute the content. They don't need to wait till the end of the cycle. So we believe when we talk to the customers, with this approach, we will see a lot of improvements on these four aspects. So this is the last slide of my presentation. And I would like to have the three key takeaways from that. So you can launch your website with minimal backend development experience now. You leveraging all the out-of-box components. You can debug your AEM project without AEM local SDK via the front-end module. And then lastly, you should be able to start using, you can consider start creating a new component variation using the star system if the content model hasn't changed. With that, thanks for that. This is the end of my presentation. So over to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, James, for your amazing session. That was some great content. James, we did receive a question in the chat, which I'll read out to you. So the first question is, what will be a decoupled architecture in AEM?
So when we say decoupled architecture, this is going to be my personal opinion. I still think AEM will be the source of the truth of the content, and your day-to-day works for interface for your content team. But when we talk about delivery, now you've got a lot of tools available now. Using this approach, you definitely decouple the responsibility between your backend team and the front-end team. And the front-end team can focus on the performance, backend team can focus on the integration. And also, no doubt to mention, you want to see that in this afternoon, the Edge Delivery Services. How can we leverage the other authoring capabilities? The way you see now is with the WYSIWYG tools. You can see the universal editors. You can see the document-based authoring. So from the end-to-end, if we take the content creation as our end goal, you can see the delivery is decoupled with the authoring, which is very different with what you usually do with a content management system. I hope this answers the question.
Perfect. And the second question that we received was, hi, James, which archetype is being used here and what is the front module?
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, when we're saying archetype, it's actually the concept of when you initialize your Maven projects. So it's compliant with all the versions that you were seeing, but the difference is you usually seeing a UI front-end module being placed or created as part of the archetype. With this approach, we actually bring it in a separate repository. I think you can still live in the same one, but in terms of the deployment, we're not leveraging the UI front-end module to do it. You still have the front-end project, but now this project has been deployed via the front-end pipeline. And then the only thing you need to change is on your page template. So rather than referring a CSS or JavaScript from UI apps of EDC client libs, now that's become a new reference of a theme. That theme is pointing to a location in the CDN. So if you're using the AEM cloud services, it's all out of box. If you want to mimic same way on the managed services or on-prem, it's also possible, right? Because you can just place it somewhere else static, have the version number, and make your website refer to it. So that's completely decoupled the front end, the component deployments and the development.
Thanks, James. And the last question we received was, could we use TypeScript instead of JavaScript?
Yes, you can use in any language or any framework. Like I said, it's pretty open, because eventually what it does is we separate the responsibility. We let the AEM only return the semantic HTML. So that in that case, that doesn't have any language restriction. But in the front-end world, we're not restricted to any framework. Using the web platform, the out-of-box or the JavaScript engine, that's fine. If you want to use the framework, it's also fine. Yeah.